This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Hey guys, time to get in on the action for the biggest moments in basketball with Prize Picks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. Just select 2 or more players, pick more or less on their projections, place your entry, and win up to 100 times your money. Right now, Prize Picks will match your first deposit of up to $100. Just download the Prize Picks app and use the code GET100. That's code GET100 on Prize Picks for a first deposit match of up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more. Pick less. It's that easy.
We made this.
Hi, my name is Benjamin Van Allen. I wrote episode 8, Familiar, of season 11 of The X-Files, and you're listening to The X-Cast.
Welcome back, everyone, to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. I'm your host, Tony Black, and I'm joined by my co-host, Carl Sweeney. How are you, mate?
Not bad, Tony. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm flying. I don't know where to, but I'm flying anyway. It's nice to be back with you for this this episode, which is in the middle of our season 9 coverage. And we're having a bit of a gap, obviously, between episodes. So the last main one I think people will listen to is Provenance. Is it Providence or Provenance? I can never get them. I get them mixed up.
I think Provenance is the last one that would have come out. Yeah, I think.
Okay, good. Okay, so Provenance, you've heard, and then we'll have Audrey Pauly coming up in a bit of a while. But we're doing some episodes in the middle with people connected to season 9 and some extra X-Files topics. And we have a very special guest today, a figure from X-Files history who I don't think we've heard on a podcast before, and he might be able to correct us. I've not heard him on a podcast before, but I'm very excited to have with us Brad Follmer, the OG Brad Follmer. So welcome, Brad, to the X-Cast.
Thank you, guys. This is my first podcast. I've listened to many, so I'm excited to be on one for a change.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Absolutely pleasure. Obviously, a lot of X-Files fans will know the name Brad Follmer, but they might think of the shady assistant director from season 9. And we've got the real deal today. So it's a pleasure to have you on, and we're going to get into some questions about your X-Files connections and things like that. But we tend to start off a lot of X-Files episodes with what we call the 5 questions of X, Brad. And we're going to slightly tweak these for you as somebody who was involved in the show, but we're going to roughly get to the same ones. So I suppose the best way to start it off would be asking you, the tweaked version, were you a fan of the X-Files before you worked on the show?
My background? I was went to films and came out to LA to write and direct like many other people, and original for a number of years as a low-level executive, and my chosen path. So I wanted to get out of that before I was too far along that line. And a mutual friend knew someone who worked in the X-Files office for Frank Spot with Chris, and that sounded great to me, to be able to work directly for a creative producer. So I put my name in the hat, and ironically, I hadn't watched the show, Chris. I was well aware of it. It was in the zeitgeist. I had just been living in New York, even though I love watching TV. And I remember at the time, my LA apartment where I lived, someone across the way always watched the X-Files every Sunday night at, I think, 9. And I would hear Mark Snow's theme would manage to cross the clock on Sundays because I would hear the X-Files theme opening. But before the meeting with Chris, I watched it just so I had a little familiarity. And like I said, it was well in the zeitgeist, so I knew all about the show, just hadn't watched it. But it was funny, when I went over to person, I'd gone in a couple of times, and this was the second interview. It was with Chris, and the other student was also up for the job. She had a button on her shirt that said, "I heart the X-Files." I just remember the foot. And I got the job, and guess, it might not have helped. And I felt I was maybe at a disadvantage in going to the meeting with Chris because I wasn't able to engage about the show. But I think they might have liked that. They just wanted somebody, not somebody who wanted to know how the season was going to end. So that may have helped. Being a part of it was, as I'm sure we'll talk about, just an amazing experience. Was a part of it.
A question we ask everybody who comes onto the show for the first time is, what's your favourite episode of the series? So it'd be interesting to hear, actually. So after you got the job on the show, did you go back and watch everything? Like, have you seen every episode of The X-Files now? And do you have a particular favourite?
Confession, just between the three of us, I haven't watched every episode of the show. Don't tell Chris. Go back and from the beginning start watching some, and I definitely kept up to date. I think the first started watching or working there was X-Cops, which I know is an unusual. It's still that I thought it was fun out of Cops with a Monster, but I think probably for my favorite overall, because I've watched some of everybody else that had to really get acquainted, but I think Triangle is one that I always and I know Chris does as well. So I definitely like that episode.
We do tend to ask, do you have a favorite season of the show? But I suppose I wonder if it would be one of the seasons that you worked on, maybe towards the end, or is there a particular favorite season of what you have seen?
Yeah, that's tough, and admittedly, I haven't seen all of them all the way through, so I might have missed some of the heyday seasons, but working on it, like I think season 8 was a lot of fun. Yeah, I mean, in season 1, obviously, just the way it sets everything, to not have that as a favorite. But yeah, I'm sure other people have more of it than I have.
So, Brad, we always ask people what their favourite character is, but I don't think we've ever asked that to anybody who's actually had a character named after them. So, yeah.
Holding up a nameplate.
So,
I love it.
It says Assistant Director Brad D. Follmer.
Brilliant.
That voice from the show.
That is amazing.
Yeah. So, yeah, I suppose the first question would be, who's your favourite character? And then kind of as a follow-up, what was it like to have a character of the show named after you as well? That'd be interesting to hear, I think.
That was wild, because I remember Cary Elwes was introduced the first episode of, you guys might know better than me. Was that season 8? I think 8 or 9.
I think 9, yeah.
Oh, was it 9? Okay, my mistake. But
it's okay.
And when the scripts are issued, I sat down at my desk and started reading that season. And as I'm turning pages, it's funny, where my desk was situated, I'm in his desk, which is like 30 feet away in his office. And he was always just focused on, and I'm sitting there reading the script. And then I kind of chuckled and reacted, and he immediately waiting for a reaction. And I'm glad I immediately read the script so that I didn't let it after he had done that. And he you don't know where it was going. I didn't know if it was just a bit character and a one-off or something like that. And after, if you don't want your name on that character, we can come up with another character. I was on, absolutely. Let's I'm happy to have that. Little did I know it would go on, and I think he was on about 8 that. But it was great, and he's such an impressive actor. So occasionally he would call into the office to speak to Chris, and I would answer the phone, and he was, Brad Follmer calling. Is this Brad Follmer that I'm speaking to? So he had a good sense of humor about it.
Very good.
That's great. That's really good. So the last one of the 5 questions we tend to ask Brad is, do you have a favourite moment from the X-Files? But I think for you particularly, do you have a favourite moment from the seasons you worked on, or a particular scene or a particular moment of production that leaps out at you as being something really special?
Wow. There are so many. Pick one, but there are many others. The one that comes to mind, Chris was Improbable, which was, I'm looking it up here, season 9 episode, and it was sort of an offbeat musical episode, a guest appearance in it. And I remember we were shooting in a casino, and the casinos here they're not like Las Vegas casinos, they're a little, and they let us shoot at like 5 a.m, but they kept the casino open. So the regulars were in the back, we're all working away, and Burt Reynolds makes his first appearance on the set. The whole crew, they've worked with stars of all calibers, and but Burt Reynolds is like a legendary icon, and he knows it. Everyone's heads turned, and he said, "I'm Burt Reynolds. I was big in the '70s," and then he kind of went off to his dressing room or whatever at that point. But it was just incredible, this Hollywood star arriving on the set at this sort of rundown casino in Los Angeles, and he was a lot of fun to work with.
That's fantastic. That's exactly how you want Burt Reynolds to be, I think.
He got along about a story of a professional athlete, because Burt was big into sports, and I think he was and there was a story, I think it was about a baseball player, Satchel Paige, who won the Golden Glove Award one year, fielder, and he didn't feel that he deserved it. Whoever had won it that year didn't feel that the award, which was a Golden Glove on a base, and he broke the award into the award to the other person he thought deserved it. And they exchanged this story on the set. The show, Burt obviously went off to his own life, and we got a packet, and we'd opened it up, and Chris looked at it. It was half of an award that had the People's Choice Award for Evening Shade. He had broken it in half, and he was sharing it out of the time that they worked together, which was a really nice touch.
So, Brad, you've told us a little bit already, I think, about when you came on board the show and how that happened. So I guess what we were wondering was, what was your day-to-day role like? Was there a typical day working on the X-Files, or did it vary a lot? What was an average day like for you working on the show, I guess?
Each with a lot of the head producers and writers, and are like the people on the set who could be anywhere at any time doing anything. Ours, receiving phone calls and mail and visitors, and organizing meetings, and Chris working with the writers. And he told me that, I think maybe on his mother's side, I think it's the Mulder side of the family, actually named Mulder, and that they were dairy farmers or something like that. So Chris would get up extreme. I always thought you should get in before your boss, but they told me early on, don't even bother at the office, because he knew what time all the Starbucks on the west side of LA would open. Would come in, and he would already be at work on his computer writing away. So, avoid anything that would distract him from getting his work done. We would get a lot of unsolicited material and people trying to get a hold of Chris, and got a little frustrated with me, and they're like, "You're just being the gatekeeper for Chris Carter." I wanted to say to him, that's my job too. But one of the great highlights, I've always thought you're in the right place if you're worst, because I'm a person who likes to take tours of things, and I got to a lot of guests of the show and things like that. So that was always a special, somebody who would be visiting, and I could walk them over to the sound stages, show them around and for the show, and know that I was in a special place, working with really talent.
You mentioned unsolicited material there, just out of interest. Did you ever come across anything? Did you read much of that stuff? Were you allowed to read any of that stuff? Was there anything that you saw that was particularly interesting, or were there things that were just, oh my God, this is terrible?
No, for legal reasons, read it at all. But we would read the cover letter, and that might also reveal information about at least the writer, if not the material. And it was people have had experiences that they wanted to share. And there were a handful of people who wrote in type with Mulder and Scully as the main character. And I guess they didn't understand the law or how things work on the lines of, we're offering you the first look at this, but if you don't choose to elsewhere, and it's like, well, good luck doing that without lawyers getting it. But no, there were a lot of genuine people who were fans of the show who wanted to share things that they had. And that was very nice, the outreach from people and the characters in the show. And that was always an interesting part of it.
So, I mean, you've talked a little bit, Brad, about how you came to join the show and everything like that. And on IMDb, it's basically right. You said about X-Cops. I think it lists on IMDb as first-person shooter as the first credited role, which is around the same time, I think. But that was mid-season 7. So what was it like coming on to the show at that point in the 7th series? Because obviously there were things going on behind the scenes around the point of the 7th series that, from what we know, were a little bit tense at points or a little bit interesting. What was the atmosphere like? I know you probably can't talk in detail about a lot of things, but what was the atmosphere like? Was it a good atmosphere? What
fun anecdote I thought was call the office a lot. Like I said, I didn't have much of a rapport with him, but he did call a couple of times or a few times. For example, auction and wanted a copy of the script that he could autograph to auction off. And he called in the morning, and he must have called a few times before that because he commented, he's like, "Please, at your desk?" Whenever I call, you answer like a brick. And I said, "I'm just doing my job." And he goes, and I wasn't familiar with the reference. It's a melody about a man who does his job very specifically and precisely and won't do it because it's on his job. And no one had ever given me a nickname before, so I was kind of flattered. And so after the call, I thought I would maybe go online and buy the book, find out more of the story. And I think it was just like an 8-page short story. So I actually found it and just read it immediately. The catchphrase of the character was, "I would prefer not to." Like, he would do his job precise inside of his normal set of tasks. "I would prefer not to." It was like that same day with another question about something. Oh, this is when he asked for a script to get it over to him. And I said, "I would prefer not to." And there was a pause where who is this guy rejecting my request? But then I'm sure that, the Bartley story that he had brought up, and he was, "Oh, you read the story, did you?" That was fun.
That's really good.
So, Brad, I guess we wanted to ask you about, I suppose during season 8 of The X-Files, 1013 was also making the Lone Gunman spin-off. So, and we're due to cover that on the podcast this year, hopefully, aren't we, Tony?
That's right.
So, Brad, I guess we were wondering about your observations about the Lone Gunman spin-off. As part of your job, were you dealing with issues related to that series as well as The X-Files?
Somewhat, yes, because the writing was being done in Los Angeles, but the production was up in Vancouver, so I did that. But I have an interesting story that I don't published anywhere or I've seen anywhere, but around that time, just before the approached by a guy, I think met him at some con somewhere, signing autographs or something, and the guy on the staff. And Chris said something about contacting the office or whatnot. He was a professional writer of the series, and he became a regular calling into the office. But over the course of calling in, he was involved with something where they were doing an outreach program to writers in Hollywood, to CIA, to bring their ideas of terrorism and threats to national security and gain tools in the field. And the writers were supposedly allowed to then take whatever they learned and go and write it, who learned something from just creative minds. And Chris and Frank Spotnitz were because of scheduling conflicts, they couldn't make it. And I think this was around, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere around then. But in hindsight, it involved, two planes flying into the World Trade Center, and an episode of The Lone Gunman involved the plane flying into the World Trade Center, I believe by remote control of pilots in the cockpit. But the timing of prepping an invitation to the CIA to discuss possible threats, terrorism, and after they were unable to attend, I always wonder, because September 11th, I think, part of the reader's perspective was a failure of imagination on the part of people against them. And I always wonder, if they had been able to go there, granted, it would have been lost, and who knows, but it was just an odd coincidence, and the timing of it was.
I think that has been questioned, hasn't it, a lot over the years about how it's quite a spooky coincidence, really. So absolutely, yeah, very much so. Obviously, Brad, originally you're on the season 7 and up to season 9, obviously, as we know, and there's obviously with the pivot point of season 8, there's obviously the big change between David Duchovny going down to being semi-regular and then leaving the show for most of the 9th season, and then Robert Patrick coming in, and then later Annabeth Gish. How did that feel in terms of the changing path of the X-Files almost? The intention with season 9, as we understand, to hopefully try and keep it going with different lead characters with Doggett and Reyes. What was it like on set? What was the feeling when this change was happening?
I don't have a lot of first-hand knowledge time, but I think there was definitely a change of dynamic and feeling that, the new arrangement would work and the chemistry would be there. But it was just the Mulder-Scully dynamic. And after all of those years to then kind of shift and open with new characters going forward. But they were great to work with. And they gave it their best effort, and I think they knew it as well. So they had a great challenge on their shoulders, and I think they did. I think part of it too is just behind the scenes. You'd like to think that you were fully aware of the circumstances you're getting into, and then you can work towards something. Questions as to, because David and Gillian were still on the show, but in a limited capacity. And I'm just speaking for myself, not from the inside of the producers and writers, but have more or less of them the following season, or how you divide the time versus the new characters. I did enjoy the name Doggett, though, that was Vin Scully's real life broadcasting partner, so I thought that was nice. But Robert Patrick, he has such great energy on the set, and Annabeth Gish is lovely. She's just wonderful, and I actually don't live too far away from her. We to the grocery store a couple times, and near the school where they go.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, and claim that I had any intention of introducing her to her. When she started on the show, Chris had a personal trainer named Wade Allen, who also does stunts for movies and TV. It'd be good if she did some training with him. And so he arrived in our office one day, and I took him bad at that. They got married, later. But so it was fun to be the point for the two of them.
I suppose one thing I'd like to ask Brad is about season 9, and I guess midway through that season, it became apparent that, the show wasn't going to go on beyond season 9. How was that from your perspective? Did you have a lot of kind of forewarning of that, or were you hoping for it to go to season 10 and were quite surprised when the cancellation came? How did it sort of play out from your perspective?
That's a good question, and I'm trying to remember exactly. I do know that from season 7 and season 8 wrap, before we knew if the show was being renewed for another season, they didn't know if it would be a series finale or just a season finale. And so they had the reasons that I was there. I would imagine that was probably possible in many others. And I went to Chris Rolling Stone magazine and asked him about, do you know the finale of the show? And I think this interview was maybe around this. And he said, I know what I want to do to end the show. He goes, the problem is you're in a race, but you don't know. And so it's like, to get where you're going, how do you properly dole out the storyline, 3 seasons versus 9 seasons? You know, how do you not get ahead of yourself or short yourself? I think probably by season 9, because David and Gillian's involvement had reduced, though it had been going on for so long, it probably wasn't a big surprise. I wish I could answer. It's not like a secret. I just can't recall. I mean, clearly the way it was scripted, they knew they were putting it. It was a 2-part finale, right? With David in a tribunal of some sort. It was interesting though. Like I say, Chris and all the writers were putting in the other seasons that I was there, and I think it was season 7. So they shot up in, I think, Big Bear, California, up in the mountains, and it's an hour drive out of Los Angeles. And Chris was being very secretive about the last, so there were no pages distributed. And I think he finished them like the day of or something. He left to hand deliver the script, the last scene pages, to the location that was 2 or 3. And this was like on a Friday evening, which, you know, Los Angeles, that's not a great time to get on the. He's driving out to the whole crew is waiting for the pages. And I think there was a freeway that caused just a huge backup in addition to normal rush hour traffic on a Friday. And with Chris personally having the only 3 copies of the pages in his hands, dry. But and as far as the finale, it was funny. He would have me do research, and it took place at that underground secret government facility. And one of the writing that he's like, do some research and find out the names of the government's most secret facilities. I'm like, if I can find that out, then they're not really secret. But it was typical Chris. If I could throw another one in, he had another great research question. I'm forgetting, it was the episode of Cathy Griffin and Randall Tex Cobb.
Your favorite, Carl.
Fight Club, yeah.
Yeah. When Chris was working on that, he said to me, can you do some research on boxing ring? The squared circle being the famous one. And you can't really go much, but I tried. And, using Google and the internet, and I came outside. He said, keep looking. And so I called like an old school boxing gym in Brooklyn. I was looking for it. They were hard pressed to know stuff. They started trying to make stuff up for me like that. I can't remember. It was clear that they were just making it up on the spot. And funny thing, this hit a wall, and Chris wasn't satisfied. And my mom randomly lives in Florida. Father was Angelo Dundee, famously Muhammad Ali's trainer, I believe. And so I thought, if I could get a hold of Angelo Dundee and ask it, and I did. I got him on the phone, and I said, what are our other nicknames? And he said he couldn't think of it either. Angelo Dundee says there are no other nicknames for the boxing ring. He was like, okay, we're good.
It's brilliant. Yeah.
That's great. There's some great stories. Obviously, then we fast forward to a good 15 years later, almost, and we're in the era of the revival series. And I know, Carl, you've got a specific question you want to ask in a minute about this, but you're credited, Brad, as on IMDb as a staff writer for the 11th season of The X-Files. So for the revival, what was it like to come back, first and foremost, on this, so for all of us, a real surprise return for the show on TV after the movie, the second movie? What was it like to come back and be involved, and how different was it for you that second time round?
It was great. It was a lot of fun. It was different. They were going to be shooting in Vancouver again, so separation of the production from the writer's room. Season 10, which was 6 episodes, Chris, I believe, wrote 3 and directed 3. I wish I could remember offhand. Was it Glenn and Darren Morgan who wrote, and
James Wong. Yeah.
James Wong. Yeah. So it's like the all-star seasons were all, they knew what they wanted to do. So I personally wasn't involved, probably just did their own thing for the most part. And then in 11, they had more episodes to fill and brought back all of that team, not brought back, but brought in additional writers to work with. Because we didn't have the same large physical production and development staff. It was pared down in order in the separation from production in Vancouver. But I think it was interesting ideas. Those guys having been involved with the show for so many years, I'm sure in the interim thoughts, they were like, oh, that would make a great episode if only the show was on the air, and yeah, also getting to see Gabe Broder had an episode, Ben Allen, who I know you've interviewed. Just great to see those guys get an episode. I unfortunately didn't get an episode, but it was great to be involved with that. I did go up. I went up, I think, just to observe the production a little bit.
So, what I wanted to ask you, Brad, about season 10, on the making of documentary that comes with the Blu-ray, there's an interview with Gabe Rotter where he says there was the potential for there to be a 7th episode for season 10 that you and he had written together. So it's really tantalizing as X-Files fans that, there's this unmade episode that was maybe in the pipeline. So we were just wondering how much you can tell us about that. Was a script written? How far along the line did it get, I suppose? If indeed it is true, a true story.
It's true. Last night I was listening to some episodes and I saw that you had an episode talking about Gabe and his episode, some of that, and this came up as a subject, and I was stunned because I didn't realize but that information was even out there. But it's true. I think what happened, I don't have all the answers. I just have my perception of it to some extent. These episodes, Chris was going to write and direct 3, and he asked me and Gabe to write 1. It's kind of, I think the thought was he might fall behind trying to half of the episodes, so maybe it would be a good idea to have one in the pocket just in case. And we did write the script, and the Last of Us being out now, ours involved cordyceps fungi causing sort of zombie characters, I think. We were in on that as well. But we wrote the script, ordered it. But I don't know how you guys have gone into the writing of the show, boarding with 3x5 note cards on a cork board. But that is a great experience. It's a tactic in writing that I've used to this day. But so Gabe and I boarded out, I'll go ahead and write it. And we finished the draft, and I think he said to us, they would only have Duchovny for X number of days, not the full, rewrite it to accommodate for that. So we went back and rewrote for that. Then we turned it in there, potentially, but we might have less days with Gillian, so could you rewrite it for that? And then it was like, I think we'll have both of them, so we rewrote it again. And we got as close as to have directed it, and I think he was like a day away from going up to Vancouver to the production team about it. And as far as I know, they didn't need it. Ultimately, they all worked out. But I think it was close to maybe doing this, because I think in terms of the timing that they had the actors, it might have worked out. But only it might have been decided on their part that they didn't want to do an extra one. Part that was the arrangement going in. So it was nice that they tried to maybe shoehorn and then they thought maybe they could use it if it came back for season 11. But then I think at that point, they had better ideas. So unfortunately, it never got made.
Such a shame, Tony, isn't it? It's because there are a few stories, aren't there, about unmade X-Files episodes, like Morgan and Wong wanted to do one about Abraham Lincoln's ghost or something, and this is one of those, isn't it? It's like, what could have been, you know?
Yeah, 100%. Brad, we'd love to read it, basically. I tell you, we'd love to read it. Because I'm sure it's great. But yeah, that's fascinating. That's really fascinating. Thank you for telling us about that as well. So, I mean, obviously, we've got to the point now where the show has ended for now. But do you still have a lot of close contact with Chris Carter and any of the rest of the team, or you know how much do you see them? How contact are you with them right now?
In fact, he's kind of helped me on a project that I was working on, and again to work on something that he had an idea for. Unfortunately, they went forward for different reasons, but it's been a good experience, and it's been. I'm actually working with Gabe Rotter on something now potentially, and still into Van Allen as well. And every once in a while, you know, different people from the shop, and it's great to see them again. You know, it's kind of cliche when people say working on a show is like, and in the case of this, it really seems true. Like, particularly on the production, in which again I work 12 or 16-hour days together, 5 days a week for months on end, and actual family. So you form tight bonds with those people. Unfortunately, then you all move off. And there were people that were on the show well before me and stayed on through the end, and a great environment with people, and good friends were made from it.
I mean, it's incredible to think now that it's 5 years already since the end of season 11, and it's the 30th anniversary of the show as a whole. I suppose one of the things that we debate as fans is, is there a future for the X-Files? Do we want Disney to reboot it or remake it, or are we still hoping for new episodes with the original actors and all this kind of thing? What's your sort of opinion on that? Do you think the X-Files is something that can go on, and it has a viable future? Or do you think it was, it was of its time and it should stay that way? I mean, what's your sort of perspective on that, Brad?
That's a tough one. It's an engine for a story and the characters, but but obviously just played such a strong part of that whole mechanism. Whether a big factor, I would think, but it is interesting that the cycle and society and the world and the prevalence of conspiracy theories that there's always sort of a possibility to do something, but do you want to tread there, or leave it equitable? Though, as you say, 30 years that's insane to me. And I remember when I guess it came back, friends of mine who had kids, they were just being into Netflix then, and they were watching all of the episodes in order, and I was like, you guys know there's like that's a long tall order, but they were really into it, and so, and just it's great. I don't know. They might do something with it, but I think they'll be very careful with what they do, probably.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, we'll have to see on that, and who knows if they do. Maybe you'll be involved again. I don't know. But in the meantime, I suppose to wrap things up, Brads, what are you up to right now? What you talked about? You've developed something with Gabe Rotter, and what are you working on right now? What is life like for you currently?
I'm always writing, always working on several deliberately, and have day job to support that. But I stay in touch with all these people. I worked with Chris on a couple things since the show, and there's positive at the right time. But always interested in meetings and just being engaged in the process, being creative and writing. So hopefully you'll be hearing more from me in the future. But that's how I act.
Yeah. Well, that'd be great if we do. Fingers crossed.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Definitely. And we are so grateful, Brad, for you to giving up your time today to talk to us about this, because there are definitely things we've discussed that X-Files fandom won't know or won't have heard much about. So this is wonderful to hear from you, and we're really grateful for your time, Brad. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Brad.
Well, my pleasure, and I appreciate all of you guys. Just the number of episodes of this podcast. I know you've got a team of other people that you work with and listen, and it is amazing that it continues to be engaging to people after so long and contribute. It was my pleasure to be, and I appreciate you reaching out to me.
Well, that's really kind. Thank you so much. So yeah, a huge thanks, Brad, for coming on the show and being part of this. So thank you. We'll be back, guys, for another episode very soon, another special episode between season 9 coverage. Carl, it's been great to do this with you.
Yep.
I'll see you soon, mate.
Likewise, Tony. Yep, see you soon.
Yeah, and just keep tuning in, guys. Thanks for listening as always. And remember, as always, trust no one.
Do you like crime stories, books, and people talking about those things? Then you should check out the Read and Buried podcast.
A murder? Oh!
I'm Frankie.
And I'm Sarah.
And in each episode, we pick a different theme and surprise and delight each other with a cheeky little review.
As you started reading, I was like, this sounds like a romance novel. And then you got to monstrous crime.
Yay, there it is. That's what we're here for, isn't it?
We're also regularly visited by many talented and best-selling authors, including the likes of Chris Whitaker, Elizabeth Haynes, Emma Stonex, Fiona Cummins, and a whole lot more.
I obviously listened to the podcast, and I listened to you interviewing Chris Whitaker, and I thought, oh, hey, that sounds like a really good fun podcast.
If you like your crime books with a big side of silly, this is the podcast for you. Listen to the Read and Buried podcast right now, brought to you by the We Made This network.
The Xcast and X-Files podcast was created by Tony Black and is produced and hosted by Carl Sweeney, Sarah Blair, and Kurt North.
You can find the podcast on Twitter at the X_cast, on Facebook by typing in the Xcast, and in our group, X-Files Basement, the Xcast podcast fan group, and on Instagram at the Xcast pod.
Don't forget, you can support the show by becoming a member on Patreon. Our patrons get early access to episodes, behind-the-scenes chats with our hosts and a thriving community of X-Files, and other premium interviews and specials. To find out more and subscribe, you can go to patreon.com/thexcast. That's patreon.com/thexcast.
We are also part of the We Made This podcast network, full of popular culture shows, including our Millennium series, The Time Is Now. You can find all of our shows at our website, wemadethispod.com, or via Twitter at wemadethispod.
Thanks for listening, and keep watching the skies.